The Other Side of Fear. Craig gave Martha's hand a reassuring squeeze. She locked his hand in a manic grip. He wanted to wipe her clammy sweat on his jeans, but he was trying to be a supportive boyfriend. The elevator dinged. He mustered a smile. Ready? He stepped out onto an unfamiliar floor. The mantis green carpet appeared to unfold before them. The hallway wasn't getting longer. Martha's footsteps were getting shorter. Craig knew they would gradually grind to a halt before they reached the entrance to Freedom Seekers International, Phobia Support Group. He would rather skip it and go to dinner, but he was sick of soups, subs, and dumplings. He yearned to use a fork or steak knife without another one of Martha's meltdowns. Craig used to think her little quirks were cute. He'd liked her nervous giggle. He'd looked past her stacks of self-help books. He'd even found her fondness for sporks adorable, in a dorky sort of way. So he'd stuck around, and their relationship had blossomed, becoming his longest. But by the end of that year, Martha had purged every fork, knife, corkscrew, needle, pushpin, and pair of scissors from either of their apartments. Their first big blowout was about a fucking fondue skewer. Balanophobia, the fear of sharp objects, eventually cost Martha her job as a dental hygienist. With that, she lost her health insurance, her psychiatrist, and her pricey pills. Their frayed relationship teetered on a razor's edge. Craig decided to cut her loose. But before he could break the news, she discovered Freedom Seekers. She had returned from that first session with a renewed sense of hope. Craig was still going to dump her, but he would wait until she could handle it. Tonight was the night. It had to be. Martha's constant need to childproof everything around her made each day into a test of endurance. Craig finally understood why his old man had referred to each of his many wives as the old ball and chain. Tonight was Martha's graduation ceremony. Craig had never been to a session. If it was any of that primal scream bullshit, he'd wait outside. Martha froze in front of the door. Craig caressed her long brown hair, resisting the urge to shove her inside. The sooner she was officially over her fear of pointy things, the sooner they could eat. His plan was to break up with her at a restaurant. Maybe that shish kebab joint he'd been dying to hit. He gave her an atta-girl wink and helped her through the door. He'd always imagined Freedom Seekers as a softly lit place with pink drapes, air scented with incense, and strains of Enya. It was just a drab conference room in a dingy commercial building. Half the room was storage for surplus furniture, scuffed up speakers, and assorted boxes of junk. At least there was a snack table. Craig thought he could spot the other tag-alongs milling about. They looked relaxed to the point of boredom, in sharp contrast to the ones still struggling with phobias. Martha joined a knot of them, each as pale and trembling as a white-knuckled fist. Craig flipped through the store-brand breakfast bars and muttered, "I suppose a box of donuts would break the budget." A man in a baggy gray sweatshirt pointed to the sign over the table. "No donuts or bagels allowed." He muttered, "Trypophobia, fear of holes." "Ah," Craig said. "Is that your thing?" "You must be Craig. Martha's told us an awful lot about you." Another man blundered between them, bushwhacking his way with a white-tipped cane. He groped the table for a snack. Craig stared awkwardly into his black glasses. "Hello. What are you in for?" The blind man said. "Nyctophobia?" Gray sweatshirt translated. "Fear of the dark." Craig winced. Oof. That's a tough break for somebody who's, visually impaired. The blind guy chuckled. So did Gray Sweatshirt. Several other people laughed at the same time. Craig turned to see them spread around the room. Had they all been listening? And what was so funny? The blind guy recited, "A man who fears suffering is already suffering from what he fears." Gray Sweatshirt pointed to another sign with that quote written in glitter pen. The blind guy cocked his ear as if to see Craig better. "And what are you afraid of?" Craig shrugged. "My ex-girlfriend says I'm afraid of commitment." Gray Sweatshirt muttered, "Gamophobia, fear of marriage." Craig nudged him. "More like game over phobia, am I right?" He turned and saw Martha standing behind him. "Just kidding, babe." She had an odd expression. Craig had learned from experience that every look a woman gave you meant something, and a look you couldn't decipher rarely meant anything good. Martha grabbed his hand. "Craig, this is Walter. He's self-actualizing with me tonight." Craig thought it was her graduation, but he tuned out her psychobabble months ago. He offered the scrawny misfit a handshake. Congrats, dude. That's huge. Walter kept his arms to his side. His brown eyes darted like chipmunks beneath a hedge of scraggly eyebrows. If this nutcase was going to graduate, Martha may not have improved as much as he'd hoped. Yeah, man, we were just talking, Craig said. What are you afraid of? Fire. Walter snapped the word like a sneeze through clenched teeth. Oh, I thought phobias were irrational. Who isn't afraid of fire? Martha and Walter's heads whipped toward the door. A man in a dark suit entered. He was lean and rangy. His cheekbones locked his thin silver glasses into his slick black hair. Craig felt Martha's pulse hammer against his wrist. That's Dr. Strickland. The doctor scanned the room and said, Let's begin. Everyone took their place in the circle of chairs, turning toward the doctor like needles drawn to true north. The doctor inhaled deeply through his nose, as if he were in a sun-dappled forest clearing instead of a dingy room downtown. Craig could almost believe the doctor's eyes reflected the blue of a cloudless sky. My friends, we have gathered once again in the noble pursuit of freedom. To our guests, I extend a warm welcome and gratitude for your generous patience. You've seen what it's like for those of us who suffer with fear. Some believe that phobias are genetic, while others lay the blame on trauma. One thing they all agree upon is that our fears are irrational. Do you think anyone had a fear of computers 100 years ago? Gray Sweatshirt mumbled. Cyberphobia. Dr. Strickland glanced at Craig. You've stuck by their side as they tried talk therapy and pills. Martha squeezed Craig's hand. Perhaps, Dr. Strickland continued, they've enrolled in one of those cutting-edge treatments that promise to reprogram your brain by tapping your fingers and rolling your eyes. He rolled his eyes for effect. Everyone around Craig laughed on cue. Yet nothing worked. And why? Because the establishment, that pyramid of quacks, pill pushers and con men, all agree these fears are not real. They're silly. It's all in our heads. He rose to his feet, as if lifted by the power of his message. But what if your fear was real? What if it was rational? It could be confronted. It could be conquered. You could take your power back. You could finally be free. Everyone around Craig intoned. The other side of fear is freedom. Dr. Strickland took his seat and nodded to an elderly woman. She struggled to hoist herself up with a creaking walker. If Dr. Strickland's eyes were clear skies, hers were dirty pools of piss. She dredged up a wet cough that shook the pendulous goiter protruding from her neck. So like, hey, my name is Brittany. Craig's ears overruled his eyes, delivering the shocking news that Brittany was, despite all appearances, a young woman. She scraped a crusty lesion from her elbow and then dragged her purpling fingers through her hair. So like, anyway, before I came to Freedom Seekers, I had issues. For real. I'm talking addiction, depression, delusions, panic attacks. Sound familiar? Everyone around Craig laughed and nodded. Brittany raised a palsied finger. That's right, you got it. I was suffering from fear. I was a full-blown hypochondriac. I saw every specialist in this city. Nobody could give me what I wanted. Until I met Dr. Strickland. All it took was one needle. Martha dug her nails into Craig's palm. Oh, sorry, bestie. She turned her mustardy eyes toward Dr. Strickland. One injection, and I was cured. I was free from fear. The other side of fear is freedom. Tonight, I am proud to pass the torch. Martha stood without releasing her grip, dragging Craig to his feet. Would he have to stand there while she sobbed out her life story? Oh God, did she expect him to give a speech? He shot a longing look at the door. Martha's hand ratcheted tighter, keeping him in place. The old ball and chain. Dr. Strickland went to their side like a wedding officiant. He asked, Martha, are you prepared for your actualization? Her chin quivered. She ducked her head. The members of the support group pulled their chairs aside. Gray Sweatshirt yanked a tarp off a low platform. Craig squinted. Was that a bed of nails? Martha's hand vibrated like a penny on the tracks of an oncoming train. The other side of fear is freedom. Craig choked back a bark of laughter. Of course! Walking across a bed of coals wouldn't cure Martha's fear of pointed objects, but nails would do the trick. And it was a trick, a fixture of magic shows that relied on simple physics. When you spread your weight across an even layer of nails, you distributed the pressure. You could safely lay down or walk across them. He had to hand it to the doc. It was brilliant. Martha's resolve wavered like a thin candle against the dark. Craig guided her to the waiting bed of nails. You got this, babe. I believe in you. He could almost taste the juicy slab of steak he'd tear into after Martha picked up her certificate or whatever. Light gleamed across the haphazard nails. This wasn't a uniform grid. It was more like a trough of rusty shrapnel. Craig blurted, "Stop!" Martha's grip clamped around his wrist, cold and hard as steel. He looked down. There was a handcuff locked around his wrist. The chain of his cuff ended in a big, barbed hook. Martha jerked the hook through her own wrist. It popped through the other side of her forearm. She took a step forward. No, wait! Craig tried to pull her back without tugging the hook. She flopped face first into the trough. She shrieked as she dragged through the jagged detritus. Every move was met with 1,000 stabs. Craig grabbed for her kicking ankle, her back pocket, a fistful of bloody shirt or hair. He screamed, "Dr. Strickland, help!" The doctor leaned over with a placid smile. "I've already helped her." Martha's head arched back, neck scintillating with steely splinters. Her blood-streaked face was wrapped with ecstasy. Dr. Strickland sighed. Her first breath of freedom. Craig called to the others, "Call an ambulance!" Dr. Strickland clapped. "Walter, are you prepared to actualize?" Walter replied with a stinking splash of gasoline. The little man twirled a metal can, dancing and drenching the carpet, walls, and members of the support group. Gray sweatshirt gagged on gas as he ran for the door. He bounced off and wrestled with the lock. Dr. Strickland held up a key and announced, "Until we are all free," he tossed the key into the trough of shrapnel. "None of us are free." Walter roared with triumph as flames leapt up the wall. The doctor loosened his tie. "I've always been afraid that I'd kill us all." The blind man stumbled towards them, swatting the flames devouring his arm. Craig barely dodged, keeping his back hunched to prevent any strain on Martha's hook. She stared up at him with her right eye, the left oozing around a broken hypodermic. Her face was festooned with cactus spines, carpet staples, thumbtacks, and sewn needles. She slurred, a scalpel dangling from her lip. "I conquered my fear." She caressed the shanks and shrimp forks sticking in her sternum, the razor blades and roofing nails in her ribs, the ice picks, arrowheads, and snarls of barbed wire gouging her guts. "But I'll die if you leave me." A spurt of blood from her wrist hit a cross-stitched sign that said, "We fear the thing we want the most." Craig stuffed his arm into the trough of spikes. Everything he touched jabbed, pierced, and sliced, except one. The key. He clenched it in his bloody fist and made a break for it. He battled through the scrum of screaming people, dragging Martha on her blood-slicked trail. He caught a glimpse of the door before black curtains of smoke swept down. Craig choked down a scalding breath and charged, key thrust out like a cavalry sword. He willed himself onward to victory. Craig wanted to be free. Martha curled around his leg like a ball and chain.